So today I wrap the series on Faith in Process, a field guide to navigating life in God, where we, for the past few weeks, have been talking about these different movements, which I believe represent in very broad strokes what Jesus did with his life. And the whole idea is, if we want to experience a vibrant faith, and Jesus is the one we're listening to and following, probably the best way to experience a abundant faith, this vibrant faith, is to actually listen to what Jesus said and do what Jesus did. Now, in the Christian tradition for many centuries, most of its history, in fact, this has all been boiled down to a whole different kind of question. The question for centuries has been, you've got a sin problem, you need to get rid of that sin. The only way you can get rid of that sin is to say the magic words about Jesus so that you can get to heaven someday. And that's been the strongest, loudest message, which has its place. There is hope that we believe in a God that is beyond the grave. And yet it's so far from the fullness that Jesus came and talked about. It's the fullness that delivers the kind of life that we want. And that's what I want to go through with you today. I gave you an extra long insert today. It's one of the things that I think Pam was referencing. And I got some notes in here for you. I'm not going to go over everything, but I'm going to touch on everything a little bit. But to get there, I want to tell you a little bit about my life and my story. Some of you already know this, so it'll be a little bit review for you. But I grew up in a very, very musical family. My dad was a pastor. And all of us kids, I'm one of four, we all learned to play the piano. I learned to play the piano worse than anybody else, but I can plink stuff out so I can find my part and so forth. We all also, in addition to being forced to learn the piano, we all picked up an instrument. So I played trombone in high school and college, which my son picked up. One of my sisters picked up the flute, which she played all the way through high school. My oldest sister played the violin, and my brother followed my dad's footsteps and played the trumpet. So very, very musical family, and we all were singers, and solo singers. Every one of us in high school and college and beyond have been soloists in different capacities and different spaces. So it made Christmas time a lot of fun. Because we kind of are the Von Trapp family singers. We have fun playing different parts. We all grew up in church singing hymns, and if we ever sat together, I never paid any attention to the lyrics I was singing because I was learning to sing all these parts. My brother and I would sit up in the choir loft that my mom directed, and he and I, as we're singing through all the hymns, we're just trading parts. One of us is doing tenor, the other bass, then alto, then soprano, and we learned to read music this way. That's my weird family. And at Christmas time, we would go into nursing homes and go through the halls and singing like a crazy tight chorus because we were all singing these parts with solo voices and confidence, and it was a lot of fun. And part of where that took me in life is I had to make a decision my sophomore year. Was I going to go more toward athletics? I played football and basketball, or was I going to go the theater direction? And I made it into one of the choirs in high school in my sophomore year, and that's when I heard that there was a musical coming out. And I went for the musical, and I got hooked. So every year in my high school, for 3 years anyway, I was in a play in the fall and a musical in the spring. And every musical that I've ever been a part of, I was the male lead in those parts because I came from a musical family and could do all the things. When you're a male lead or a female lead, or you have a large part in a show, it requires an incredible amount of work. Years later, just a mere 20 years almost here, I was invited to be in the last show that I was a part of, which was South Pacific. And again, cast as one of the male leads, the Frenchman named Emile Debec. Some of you may not remember the show, but you probably remember the song "Some Enchanted Evening." Da 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 da. Have you heard that one? Well, that was my song. And Sharon Rogers invited me to do that because she was the director of the drama department at the school, and part of her master's degree program was to create a show that truly involved the entire community. So it was this really fun experience of high school students and adults like me coming together, learning to work together, building the sets, the whole thing. It was a marvelous experience. But when I first got the part, it was very intimidating because I hadn't acted for decades, unless you call this acting, which maybe some of you do. But anyway, and so I just dusted off my old strategy, and it required many, many hours of memorizing lines, and it ended up, every scene I was in, I actually memorized everybody's lines, so I knew when I was supposed to come in. It meant showing up hours after work every day. Lynn was very patient during this period because it would be 2 to 3 hours every day during the weekday to block out scenes. Nothing happens by accident in the theater, so we're blocking everything out. I'm learning to dance, which I'm terrible at. I know you've heard rumors that I'm an awesome dancer. It's not true. I only had 9 bars of a waltz, and I was terrified, and I should have been. So, and then you had to learn the songs, and then you had to learn to do the songs with orchestration and all this. It's an incredible amount of work to do it. But by the end of the show, once we had our final run, I became Emil DeBeck, every show for, 6 shows or 7 shows, however many we did. And at the very last show, which is customary at least in high school productions, is we wanted to take a moment to thank those who made it possible. So we thanked all the families, all the people backstage, and of course, we honored our director, Sharon, and her husband, who directed the pit orchestra and all that, and others. And the funny thing was, as I was making this announcement, because they knew that I talk all the time, and I can probably not be afraid to just speak off the cuff in front of a crowd, they asked me to do it, which I gladly did. So we walked off stage, and we're getting our makeup stuff off and getting our belongings together because the show's wrapped. And one of my Nellies, I had 2 female leads who shared that role, they kind of looked at me funny and they said, "So when you were making all those thankful mentions and all that, why were you using a French accent?" I had no idea that I was using a French accent because on stage, as long as I was in that production, I remained Emil DeBeck. And that kind of makes it a point that I want to get at as we go into this final talk on this series. Have you heard this phrase, you fill in the blank, practice makes? No. Practice makes permanent. I heard somebody say it. Practice makes permanent. So I became sort of semi-permanently Emil DeBeck as long as I was doing that show. It took time to learn the role, time to learn the moves, time to learn the nuances. Faith is kind of like that. What we are trying to do is model our lives, given our genetic disposition, our personality type, all of that wonderfulness that makes us incredibly unique. But we're trying to understand how to live our lives based on what I think is a person who lived their life, maybe the best that has ever been lived, the most shalomi that has ever been lived, the most loving that has ever lived. I know there are other greats, and don't take anything away from them, but for me, I look at Jesus and think, if there's somebody I want to model my life after, it's him. If there's somebody who's teaching I want to pay attention, it's him. If there's somebody who understood how to relate to God, it was him, and I want to figure out what he did. This whole series is about that, helping us know the rhythms, the unforced rhythms of grace, which Jesus lives so naturally. Reminds me of this quote from Walter Rauschenbusch, which I shared at the very beginning. This is a guy who was a theologian, a pastor who had a powerful mystical experience and later on helped change major justice issue problems in New York City's Hell's Kitchen in the early 1900s. He said the main thing is to have God, to live in God, to have God live in us, to think God's thoughts, to love what God loves and hate what God hates, to realize God's presence, to feel God's holiness and to be holy because God is holy, to feel God's goodness in every blessing of your life and even in its tribulations, to be happy and trustful, to join in the great purposes of God and to be lifted to greatness of vision and faith and hope with God. That is the blessed life, and I want that. And I think following in the steps of Jesus gets us there. So on every one of these 5 things that we're looking at, stretching our mind, kneeling in service, standing for grace and justice, connecting with others, commune with the divine, I wonder if we should put a question mark on every one of those. Not to question whether or not those things are any good or the veracity of those things, But to remember that Jesus, when he started his ministry, he came across a group of fishermen on the shores of the Sea of Galilee, and he simply said, "Follow me." And it was an invitation. It was an invitation to follow him. These are invitations to follow. Will you be a lifelong learner? Will you stretch in your thinking? And so I give you some ideas about how to do that, because if you are not intentional about stretching the way you think about God, the way you think about theology, you think about the Bible, you think about complex issues, you will remain exactly as you are. And I have known people who learned their theology at age 5 and were no different by 95 in their understanding of God and in the way they lived their life. I don't want to be that guy. And so we have developed a list that will be a living list. You're welcome to go find it now. Apparently, there's lots better things to do than to listen to me, which I agree. But on our website, crosswalknapa.org/resources, you will see a list of a good place to start. Really good theological reads, and I encourage you to do that. I try to make it easy for you here because I do series on books. And the series coming up, I think you're really going to enjoy it. The writer is a very gifted writer, and he's going to take us through some theological themes that we've been talking about a long time, but it's all in one book. It'll take you somewhere, I don't know, each chapter's 20-something pages or so, or less. So it's going to take you a little bit of time to invest in that, but I encourage you to do that as an investment in your faith. In January, I'll be reteaching The Heart of Christianity, which is the best deconstruction, reconstruction book out there. If you've taken it before, take it again, because you're not the same person that you were the last time you took it. Read the book again, because you're not the same person the last time you read it. There are some of these kinds of things that are just helpful. So will you choose to follow Jesus in his example of stretching your mind? And will you choose to follow Jesus in terms of kneeling in service? He did this with his whole life. He's known for it. He's famous for it. And I also give you a link, by the way. This is my blog today. So if you go to the website, go under teachings, pull this up. It's already live. So anything you see hyperlinked here is already online, ready for you to do. And there's a cool resources related to kneeling in service. There's a website you can go to if something at Crosswalk doesn't really scratch your itch, or if you don't have time for that, but you're really passionate about something else, you can go to volunteernow.org. You type in your zip code or whatever city you're in. You type in some of your interest areas or passion areas, and you hit OK, and it generates a list of organizations that need help related to your interest areas. It's super cool. And so all kinds of things for you to get involved. And if you've got the capacity to do that, go for it. Some of you don't have the capacity to do that. You're raising your kids, you're in 100 different directions, your work commitments are just incredibly high. Well, great news for you. That doesn't mean that you kick Neil to the curb. It means that you get to, as we all should, we get to incorporate kneeling in service as a way of life, as a way of thinking about others. How can you be a force for good and kindness in the world in every interaction you have? Because you can be the atmosphere changer if you start your day off right and think that way. On the Standing for Grace and Justice, I got a little hot under the collar a few weeks ago talking about immigration, which sometimes I do because I feel like that's I have a whole lot of issues I could get hot under the collar about, but that one I was particularly incensed about for a range of reasons on immigration issues. But I give you a whole bunch of other things. I have a group here that is helping generate a living list of ways to get involved. And we've got to start on it in the blog today, and we'll eventually create another document that will live on our website. But every hot link that you see here in this handout, which you can tell it's a hot link or a hyperlink because it has, it's underlined, it's in blue print, has a way to get started on this. Getting and standing for grace and justice does not mean that you are taking on every cause in the world and you're going to make it all happen. But it might mean that you are informed about many causes that matter. And so there are hyperlinks here to connect you to issues about the environment, about LGBTQ equity and inclusion, about racism, about political action, about human trafficking, and on and on and on. And some of these things is you're just getting introduced to an organization that does great work, and you're just signing up for their newsletter so that you can stay informed. Some of these are probably going to invite you to donate some money. And I've done that. So I've got a range of things that I'm a part of. I get their emails and I give my $5 or $10 or $15 to those different organizations. And you know what it does for me knowing that I've done all that? It makes me feel like I'm at least doing something. My job's pretty complex and it takes most of my life. But it makes me feel good that I'm funding a thing that's going to help the environment. I'm funding a thing that's going to help these other causes, and I'm being informed on it. And it's automated. So I don't even have to think about it now. It just shows up in my inbox, and I read the latest from the Sierra Club on what they're doing here in town and nationwide. That kind of stuff. And a little bit of money, hey, $5, that's a cup of coffee nowadays. So I highly recommend get your feet wet. That'll keep you as an informed person about what's really going on in the world. And then when we wring our hands about what are we going to do, what are we going to do, what are we going to do, you're doing it in some small fashion. So please think about that. And then there are times when our church will stand together and do something big. And there's actually going to be something happening at the end of this month. This is late breaking news. There's very little press on it. But there is a significant amount of anti-Semitism happening here in Napa. Lots of flyers being put around Congregation Beth Shalom. Rabbi Niles is a friend of mine, and that does not need to exist anywhere. However you feel about what's happening in Israel and Hamas and Palestine and Gaza and all of the mess that's there, we don't treat people, we treat people as equals, okay? So that's a separate issue. We are wanting to speak into and stand up against hate. So there's going to be an opportunity for you to gather with others in Napa, and more information on that, but it's coming up at the end of this month. And I hope you'll consider taking a little time out of your Sunday afternoon to join together and making a difference that way. And finally, one other thing on this stand thing. And the reason I'm spending a little bit more on time on this is because I think for some of us, we don't want to deal with it. We don't want to get political with our faith. And we want to keep church where church is, and we want to keep our politics out of it and vice versa. Well, guess what? If you're following Jesus, you don't have a choice, because he was all over it. How you do it better reflect Jesus if you're wanting to be a Jesus follower, which means nonviolence, which means you carry shalom wherever you go. You support shalom and whatever that looks like. But on these 5 things, to say no means you're knocking out 20% of the deal. To say no to 2 of these means you're taking out 40% of the deal. 40% off the 100% takes you to a D-. I think you want more than a D- in your faith experience. Last thing on that list in that section in your handout is another website which you ought to check out. It's called smartvote.org. And it is not a partisan kind of thing. They just give you facts. So when you go in there, you can find out who your local representative is, and so you're connected where you need to be. If you need to write a letter to somebody to make some noise, then now you know who to write that letter to. But it also helps you just see the facts. So they have candidates to look at and speeches. So if you hear that one candidate said this or the other thing, you just click on the tab and it will give you all the speeches that have been listed. And you can just read verbatim, what did the person say? And then you can seek out your commentary as you want. But generally, most of our news anymore is commentary. You're hearing people talk about what somebody else talked about. Well, this at least gets you the raw data. So do that. This next area, I talked a lot about connecting with others last week, so I'm not going to talk any about that today, except that, man, what a great amount of testimonies we had last week about different ways this community has been amazing. And it was great to see so much resonant. But I do want to spend a moment talking about communing with God, which is sort of our spiritual practices, what we do to make all of this work. And there's a really good motivation for why we would want to do this, which I'm going to share at the end of the teaching today. But I give you some practical tips on how to pull off this communing with God. Churchy language would call this your quiet time or your devotional, and it really, really matters. There was a woman, her name was Julian of Norwich, and she lived in the 13 and 1400s in the UK. And when she did, somewhere in her, I think she was maybe around 30 years old, she had a life-threatening illness, and she literally thought she was going to die. And while she was in a state of unconsciousness, she had an incredibly powerful mystical experience that shaped the rest of her life. She came out of that and wrote a book expressing her experiences. It became the first written publication by a woman in the English language. Pretty awesome. She became an anchoress after that experience. She literally got walled into the walls of the church. She entombed herself with access for people to come ask questions and slots for food and that kind of thing, but that's where she lived the rest of her life, giving wisdom and prayer, contemplation, all this. And she came up with a word for what we're after in this devotional time that we're calling communion or communing. And author Mirabai Starr, who is one of the translators of her work and a scholar of Julian, said this about this idea, what Julian called oneing. Instead of talking about meeting with God or union with God, Julian coined the term oneing. Oneing, everybody say one-ing. Okay, now you know what I'm talking about. Oneing is a reflection of what already is for Julian. We already are one with God. We always have been and we ever shall be. This life is nothing if not a reawakening to that reality of our oneness, oneing with God. In some ways, it is a matter of remembering what has always been. That oneing, of course, is rooted in love. It's not just oneing for the sake of oneing, it's oneing for love, that we would be more united with God. Howard Thurman has a lengthy quote, but it's all worth it, that I want to share with you here. He goes on, he says, "Finally, there must be a matured and maturing sense of presence. This sense of presence must be a reality at the personal level as well on the social, naturalistic, and cosmic levels. To state it in the simplest language of religion, modern humans must know that they are a child of God and that the God of life in all its parts and the God of the human heart are one and the same. Such an assurance will vitalize the sense of self and highlight the sense of history with the warmth of a great confidence. Thus, we shall look out upon life with quiet eyes and work on our tasks with the conviction and detachment of eternity. All of us want the assurance of not being deserted by life nor deserted in life. When Jesus prayed, he was conscious that in his prayer he met the presence, and this consciousness was far more important and significant than the answering of his prayer." Let that sink in. For Jesus, the second most important thing might have been the answering of the prayer. The most important thing was that he knew that the presence of God was with him all the while. It is for this reason primarily that God was for Jesus the answer to all the issues and the problems of life. When I, with all my mind and heart, truly seek God and give myself in prayer, I too meet God's presence, and then I know for myself that Jesus was right. Jesus himself, I think, had one of these Satori kind of moments that blew his mind. I think that's what started his ministry and what transformed his life. I don't think he was always as Jesus-y as he was when he started his ministry. And so some of the things that he incorporated, Jesus was known, these are your hot tips for the day, and these are in your handout as well. But one of the things that he did is he protected the time and space. So the Bible itself talks about Jesus breaking away at different times to just be in the presence of God alone. Sometimes he did it because he wanted to get his head on straight. Like after he had his baptism experience, which I think was one of those mind-blowing things, he went on a 40-day camping outing all by himself because he had a lot to sort out. After John the Baptist was killed, he broke away, probably to mourn in the presence of God. The night before he was arrested, or the night he was arrested, he's alone, crying, weeping, praying his heart out to God because he knows what's ahead, and frankly, he doesn't want to do it. and he's trying to figure out, how am I going to get through that? If you don't protect this space, this devotional space, this communion space with God, it will get sabotaged left and right. If you do not protect it, no one else is. And it's one of the most important things you can do. It starts your day off right. And I encourage you to make this the start of your day, somewhere at the beginning. Now in my life, both of my kids are grown and flown. So we have lots of quiet space in our house. So this is really easy for me to incorporate. But when our kids were buzzing around every morning, and getting ready and out the door, by 6 a.m. to catch a band rehearsal or whatever, that meant for me I had to wake up even earlier so that there would be peace and quiet in the space. You have to protect it because it will get crowded out if you don't. The other thing I would say on the protecting time and space, and this comes from a guy named James Clear, who wrote a book called Atomic Habits. It's an excellent book. As he says, to create consistency with things, set your space up. This would be under the protection. Set your space up for success. So he says for exercise, if you're a person who wants to get exercise done first thing in the morning, he said, set out your workout clothes. Put it all in the right place. Put your tennis shoes, at the bottom of your bed or whatever, so that you don't have to think about it. It's just all ready to go. And I would say similarly for your devotional time. Create the space and set it up. Put your journal there. Put your Bible there. Or if this is your Bible, put that there, Get your coffee space ready so that it's just ready for you to sink into that space and make it happen. The other thing I talk about has to do with attitude, that sometimes we can look at these things as obligations and shoulds, and that kills our whole experience. So anytime you feel like you just have to do this, Pastor Pete said, I have to do this, and I'm just going to feel so bad when he asked me, how's it going? And I've said, I'm doing terrible. I should really do this. I should really do this. Remember a few weeks ago we talked about the tyranny of shoulding yourself. Well, if you find yourself in that space, literally stop everything. Don't do it. Take a breather until you can come back to it, recognizing that it is an invitation to breathe and to live. It's okay to take a break if you've gotten your head in a weird space. Checking in with yourself, this simply has to do with kind of like with that video-driven meditation we did, is check in with your emotional well-being. This is especially important for men because men suck at emotional life. Women are much better wired for this. This is a data-driven thing. I'm not saying anything sexist here. It's true. Women are more advanced in communication and capacity to articulate emotion stuff far better than men. It's like a 10-to-1 difference in terms of understanding emotional language. So guys, if you need help, I have a little chart I can give you with all kinds of feeling words so you can identify how you're feeling today instead of just the 3 that you're used to, grumpy, angry, and perturbed, right? So I can help you with that, but it's important to check in with yourself because the atmosphere that you're bringing into it, if you're angry, you're sad, or whatever, it's going to impact your whole experience. But when you get it out there, it's like you release it. And now you're more open for whatever the Spirit might be doing in your life. I encourage you to spend some time on breath work. And I gave you a good quotable for this in your handout. Spend more time on breath work. Just do it. Americans suck at being still and quiet. You'll be glad you did. That's it. So for some of you, when you do quiet breath work, just focusing on your breath, when you get about 8 seconds in, you're starting to get antsy. Well, okay, start with 8 seconds. Then try 15 seconds, then try 30 in a minute. The more you can do this, the more your blood pressure is going to go down, the more centered you're going to become, and the more you're going to experience what this is all about. That's why we incorporate meditation in here, as we want to keep that as part of your life. Now, the next thing has to do with incorporating devotional reading. This is not study material. This is a voice that you're allowing into your life. I give you a hyperlink to one that I use every single day, which is from the Center for Action and Contemplation. It's the thing that Richard Rohr started. So every day I'm hearing some reflection of his. It's like 3 minutes, so it's not a lot. Or somebody else on staff or some other reader. That thing from Julian of Norwich and Howard Thurman, it came from one of his pieces a couple of weeks ago, and I knew it would be really good for this section. So sign up for something like that, but be aware. that not all voices are coming from the same camp. And it could be that you find yourself, it seems okay at first, but then all of a sudden they're using language about how everything in your life is God's will, even the bad stuff. And that does not fit how we think about things. And that's going to be a challenge for you. So be aware of who you are inviting into that headspace, because it matters. It's a very vulnerable space, and you are giving great permission to whoever you're reading or listening to speak. Next thing, journal your thoughts and gratitude. I've talked about that so much I don't need to do it here, except to say that all the research suggests that when you write it down, your thoughts, your feelings, your insights, your gratitude, it has a much more impactful effect on your life than if you just think it or speak it out loud. And finally, transition into and out with this thing with a benediction. And I give you 2 prayers in your handout today. You're welcome. I give you a daily prayer. This might be great to start off your day or read while you're eating your breakfast or right before you go out the door or even while you're at a long stoplight. Just say this. This will help you get started because it helps orient your day toward love and grace. And the evening prayer, what I love about this one is it helps you end your day with gratitude. You recognize what's happened in your life. You receive the blessings that you've received from the day. Can't you see how this stuff together makes a massive difference in your orientation toward life? It's not rocket science, and yet many of us don't do it. And it would be very helpful if we did. So there was a mega church in the Chicago area called Willow Creek Community Church. I'm ending with this. And they did a study something like 20 years ago. And they wanted to find out why it was that some of the church members just had this incredibly robust faith that showed up really in these 5 different areas. That these were people that were committed to lifelong learning and serving and standing for grace and justice and communing and connecting with each other. It's like they were kind of the models of what this Jesus following was supposed to look like. And yet in the same church, they had folks kind of all over the map. Some were kind of in and out, not really doing a lot for them. And then there were plenty of people who their faith was just a showing up on Sunday, and that was about as good as it got. And when they talked about their life experience and faith, there was a radical difference between all these people. Those who were seeming to be rocking it pretty good, their life experience was much stronger and better than these folks over here. And they wondered what could be the common thread. You know what the number one indicator was for people to experience a vibrant faith and therefore a life of shalom, abundance, love, joy, peace, patience, kindness, all those wonderful things? Their devotional life. How did they start their day? Those people who carved out time. And for you, maybe all you can do is 10 minutes, fine. But try to work up to 30. Because when we start our day in that space, we give a foundation for our whole day to sing. You are fashioning your eyes and your ears for the Spirit of God to show up. You are saying to God, I want to be fully alive in your presence in this whole day. Help me see where you're moving and help me know how to move with you. It's a radically different way to start your day. So I encourage you, I challenge you to give it a try. If you haven't done it for a while or if you've never done it, see what happens. I'm giving you the tips and just start, figure out how to do you. There's no magic formula here, but it's going to involve some of these things, being still and quiet, breath, checking in, inviting something into your head, and just see what happens. Because I'm confident from my own experience that when you're doing it regularly for all the right reasons, it makes your life a lot better. And when you neglect it and don't, you can start to feel other things creep in. Stress, anxiety, worry, all of the things that we'd rather not have focused in our life. You with me? All right, well, today was very practical. I want to spend just a moment in prayer before we say this rendition of the Lord's Prayer together. So, would you join me in prayer? So God, here we are on Labor Day weekend when we are recognizing the value of labor, the value of work, And it is a gift. And there is a way to work faith into our lives that is also a gift. And so I pray, God, that something today will help nudge us in the direction of following you more faithfully, more fully, in all of the ways that we would ask ourselves, okay, how can I learn more in the months ahead? How can I carry an attitude of service wherever I go? How can I stand for grace and justice wherever I go? How can I connect with others in real community? And how can I deepen my communion with God every day? These are all invitations to follow Jesus. God, help us. Help us to see the value. These are counter-cultural things. They are counterintuitive challenges, invitations. May we sense your Spirit saying, I'm with you as you come forward. I'm with you as you say yes. I'm with you now, and I will be with you the whole way through. We want more shalom in our lives, God, and we hope this will help get us there. To that end, we lift our gaze to the screens, and we pray this prayer, which is all about bringing shalom into this world. Let's say it together. Our loving, supportive, holy Abba, Daddy, friend. Your presence is here and everywhere. May your divine commonwealth come. May your will be done through us. We are grateful for the gift of food and work for all to eat their fill. May we work for a world where mutual grace and respect abound. May we foster shalom everywhere. Strengthen us for the work to which we're called. Amen. May it be so. Thank you so much for spending some time on your weekend today. Hope you had a great time. We'll see you next week.